Okay, we're going to call to order this April 3rd, 2025 meeting of the City of Santa Cruz Planning Commission. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Kelly?
Present.
Kennedy?
Here.
McKelvey?
Here.
Dan? Gordon? Chair Paul Hamas.
Here. And Commissioner Gordon and Commissioner Dan are absent with notice. Okay, any statements of disqualification from commissioners tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to oral communications. Oral communications is a time for members of the public to address the commission on items that are not, not on tonight's agenda, but are within the scope of our charge. Is there anybody that would like to speak to oral communications tonight?
I mean, staff, you can go ahead if you want.
Seeing no one in the chamber, we will close oral communications and move on to approval of minutes. We have one set of minutes from March the 20th, 2025, and we will see a recommendation.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner McKelvey, seconded by Commissioner Kelly. We'll just do all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously. So we will move on to the public hearing, and we have a couple different items on our agenda tonight under the public hearing. The first is related to zoning ordinance amendments related to design standards for multifamily housing and state density bonus, reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, licensed community care facilities, low barrier navigation centers, and historic structures on Mission Street, among other changes to the general plan. And we will hear a staff recommendation. And just for those that didn't get here, we're going to have a question period in between our first presentation and then also follow with the secondary question period as well. So you can address questions to our staff after the first presentation and then again after the second one. Okay, great. And we'll hear from staff.
All right, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay out there? All right, great. Nice to meet you all. My name is Bennett Williamson. I'm a planning technician here in the Advanced Planning Group, and I'm actually an intern. And I'm happy to be giving my first staff presentation here tonight on the objective design standards for multifamily housing. We've been working on this project since last year, so looking forward to talking about it. So, first of all, I do want to shout out our team on this, myself and Sarah and Matt working in the Advanced Planning Group. We also worked with Kristen Hall, who was a contractor, an urban designer who worked on the first set of standards when they were first passed. We also spent a lot of time talking to our current planning staff here at the city. And while we had great suggestions from a lot of them, I want to shout out Rena Zhu, who was in all the meetings with us to put together these recommendations. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what are objective standards, just to give a reminder, and then I'm going to talk about some of the goals of the amendments. We're going to talk about some of the themes of what the proposed amendments are and give some examples of projects that why we wanted to bring these changes forward. And yeah, and then we'll take questions after that. So just starting out, okay, what are objective standards? So this is a part of our municipal code that it defines the look and feel and function of new housing. So in the staff report and the ordinance, there's sections on like lighting and landscape requirements and the modulation of buildings and roof forms, things that have to do with the design of buildings. Notably, this section of code doesn't have anything to do with building heights, and we're not proposing any changes in regards to that. What makes standards objective is that they're specific and they're measurable. They should be able to have a sort of yes or no answer. And so here's an example of two kinds of code language. These are both about design standards about how a building or proposed development sort of relates to the other buildings of the neighborhood near it. And so on the left, you have some more subjective language, right? Talks about reducing the apparent mass and scale, being sensitive to the neighborhood. That's language that could be interpreted really subjectively by the architect or the developer or a commissioner or a current planner. And so on the right, you see a more objective standard dealing with the same topic. It's defining this neighborhood transition plane that refers to the underlying setbacks and the starting height. So you can see that objective standards are often a lot more technical, but it is something that when especially staff look at design proposals, they can look at it and say, okay, we feel that it's very clear, yes or no, you have met this standard. The reason that we use these objective standards is that the state requires that we use only objective standards when doing design review. So yeah, so that's a little background on objective standards. So in terms of the goals of this update in general, big picture, we just want to refine the standards that were approved in 2023. There was a big public engagement effort in 2021, 2022 that informed the community's idea of what they wanted these design standards to be. And both our housing element instructs us to update these standards periodically. We also want to learn from, what we see with the developments coming through and see how we can continue to improve the outcomes for the community. So some of the ways that you'll see that in this update, we're talking about adding flexibility that helps support housing development in general, and especially affordable housing. There's a few things that we heard from developers that could help changes in design that could make things more feasible for them. You'll see that in some areas we're talking about reducing certain requirements, but in other places we're taking things that are optional and making them required. And this is a way that we want to maintain a variety of form in our proposals, because that was something that we really heard strongly from the public, that they want to see this variety of form in buildings. One thing that we're doing with these waivers is trying to encourage partial compliance, with these standards, we're trying to encourage partial compliance rather than waivers. So this relates to the state density bonus, which some of you will be familiar with, but developers that are taking advantage of the state density bonus law, they have these, they're afforded these waivers that allows them to waive out of a lot of standards, including design standards like that are in this section of code. We think that some of the changes that we're making here are really going to, we're going to see that the plans come in and they're more aligned with our existing requirements without needing waivers. So we're going to get more, even with partial compliance, we'll get more of what we want, right? And that's a good outcome for the community. We've definitely heard from people about what they think about the new types of buildings that have been proposed. So we have some things that we want to encourage, some new types of design. And again, variety is really important to the community. So there's some suggestions of that in here. There's a section about refining ground floor rules to support new businesses. This is something that came out of conversations with our economic development staff, thinking about ways to lower barriers for businesses to get started. And in general, what we think in total, right, the big goal is to make development review more predictable, design review more predictable and consistent for everyone, for the developers and architects putting together the proposals, to our staff and to the public to really make sure that they're seeing good outcomes. So we started this project last year, and we, like I mentioned, we talked to current planning a lot, who's been, as they've been implementing the new standards, they've been keeping track of changes or fixes that they think would be appropriate. So we talked to them a lot about what they thought was needed. We also reached out to the development community, talked to market rate developers, affordable developers, people that work on large scale, small scale, invited both written comment, and then we also hosted a developer roundtable for them to give feedback about specific parts of the standards. Some things were really general, some things were specific. And then, as I mentioned, we also talked to economic development staff. And so as we were capturing the issues and the amendments that might address those, we kind of came to there's these three sort of overarching themes of the amendments that are proposed. And you see this reflected in the staff report as well. Building shape and materials requirements is one area. The ground floor design and activities on the ground floor is another area. And then sort of clarifying details like maybe smaller things or a place where we needed a new definition and that sort of thing. So I'm gonna go through each of these and give you some of the highlights from each area. The first one's the most technical, so we'll probably spend a little more time in that one. All right, this is a fun slide. So we talk a lot in the requirements about changes in plane. And so I would just want to introduce this concept right off the bat. You can see it in this top left image here. The change in plane is where you make a change in depth of that flat facade of your building. And this is something that gets referenced throughout the requirements. It's changes in plane, they're a really great way to provide variation and visual interest in the facade. They help break up the building from looking like a large mass and instead having it look like a series of sort of connected volumes, and that's really something that makes for high quality buildings. And so in our current requirements, the number of changes in plane that buildings are required to incorporate is the same regardless of how tall or how long your building is. So for every 30 feet of the front length of your building, you're required to have one change in plane. And there were some different options about how deep that change in plane might be. So as we were seeing development proposals come in and we're hearing from developers, we're sort of seeing like two issues with what's happening with that. On the smaller buildings, it might be a pretty small, maybe a small residential project. We'll look at an example in a minute, where there's a number of changes in plane required, even though it's a very small building. And then with each of those changes in plane, you have to change materials at the same time. And there's other limitations about how much space the material can take up on a facade. So these smaller buildings were getting very, very busy and kind of not having the desired outcomes, a real variety of materials when they could maybe be simpler or more elegant. And then on the other end of the spectrum, on the largest buildings, there were more changes in plane required because they were longer and bigger, but the changes in plane were not having this significant depth to really break up the building and break up the massing, break up the roof line. They were more shallow and looking, so the changes in plane and the material changes were looking more like decorations kind of on the outside of the building, when really we want to break up the building more. So there's a number of related changes that are proposed here about how to address that. Basically, the first proposal here is to update the standards so that we differentiate by building height to better address those scale issues. So you can see here on the top left, we're proposing that buildings 3 stories or fewer would have a change in plane, and it would be required that they have a minimum 2-foot depth on that change in plane for every 30 feet. Now, if you go to the right, you see that for buildings that are more than 3 stories, they're required to have a change in plane every 50 feet, but it's required to be deeper. It's required to be 4-foot deep minimum. So you have a few less changes in plane overall, but the ones that you do have are now required to be a certain depth. And we really feel that that is going to impact in a positive way the shapes of the buildings. The last example here at the bottom is for your taller and really longer buildings, right? If you have a frontage that's over 100 feet long, you're adding in this notch that you can see there on the right. At least 12 feet wide, at least 6 feet deep. This is like a deep cutout into the building that really helps break up the roof line in that way. So the other detail in this is that I mentioned that you have to have one change in plane for every 30 feet. And our current rules say, yes, and at the first 30 feet, as soon as you hit 30 feet, you have to have 2 changes in plane. We're proposing to round down and instead say for the first 30 or first 50 feet, you have to just have 1 change in plane. So in general, basically the combined focus of these changes is really on making each change in plane more substantial. And we feel like that's going to lead to the look of the more like visually compelling buildings. So thanks, that's the most technical one. Related to that, also in this building shape and materials requirements, we talked about how these sort of requiring multiple materials in different instances was sort of adding up and in a compounding way that was making kind of busy buildings. And so we're proposing to reduce the standards about requiring multiple materials in different cases. We really think that by requiring the notches to be deeper, again, it's going to have the impact that we want without having the material try to make up for that change in the building that you want to see. The other thing, we've seen a lot of proposals coming in with flat roofs. And so we're proposing to add a option in the roof forms where you can step back the top floor of your building, as you see on the image on the right here, as a way to fulfill one of your required roof forms. And that's a really effective way to reduce the effect of the massing of the building. The other design or sort of new option that we're proposing, it's not illustrated here, is for more highly textured facades. And we talked about it in the staff report. Basically, for projects that for larger projects, so this would be for projects 4 stories or more, if they're willing to have a deeper window inset than is required, so 6 inches, they can have a longer, flatter facade that waives some of the change in plane requirements, but only if they use those high quality materials and that deep window inset. And we really think that is going to encourage like maybe you could imagine like a brick warehouse kind of look or a mission style kind of look. The windows are set in very deep. You have that nice textured stucco and brick. So we've added an option that would allow that. So here's a couple examples of development projects that have come through that we think illustrate some of these things that current planning brought to our attention. So here's an example. This is a duplex project at 97 Alta Vista. And here we bring this one up, sort of that classic example of these clashing requirements are creating this really busy and fussy design. So because the front and the back each had to have 2 changes in plane and a change in material each one, and then they have to have 2 different exterior materials on the front and the back. And also, you know, no building material can cover more than 85% of any face. And all these things added up to a building where you can see there's like this horizontal siding proposed on the top floor, this hardy shingle siding in the middle, stucco on the bottom here, this sort of like brick-like band across the back on the lower here. So all these requirements adding up to probably make like requiring a pretty inelegant composition. So we've seen different versions of this. And so the idea being if you round down the number of changes in plane, you could have a simpler building form. And also if you reduce the required materials a little bit, you can have a more elegant, simple choice of materials for these smaller projects. In terms of the larger projects, we haven't, a lot of the larger projects have used density bonus to waive out of a lot of our requirements. So the one we're showing here is an example that this is a building proposed at Mission Street. And this is one that staff felt, hey, this is really close to meeting the intent of the design. Like, look at these nice, you know, the way that they really have these changes in plane in the facade. They create these sort of 2 different volumes of the building. They're using these see-through balconies here. It has a nice active ground floor because this is a mixed-use zone where they're required to have active ground floors. But nonetheless, there were some specific ways where this didn't quite meet the standard. And so we had to go through the variation process, and that adds time and uncertainties to the process. So projects like this with just a little more flexibility in our design standards would probably come in meeting the standard already. And that would help, you know, create consistency and potentially speed some of these approvals through. So those are just some examples of the sort of building and materials effects. The last 2 sections on the ground floor design and then the fixes are getting into more specific you know, sort of case-by-case fixes. We want, in general, to add a little bit of flexibility for affordable projects, and we had a developer specifically mention we were requiring a 15-foot minimum ground floor height for mixed-use buildings, and they had said that if we could allow them to go a little bit lower down to, say, 12 feet, then they wouldn't have to use like concrete and steel construction on the ground floor. They could do all wood construction, and that would make their projects more feasible, and felt like you could still have a pretty good high quality business, good windows and everything with a 12-foot ceiling. So So there's a proposal in here that for projects that are 50 or more percent affordable units, that they can have that flexibility about the ground floor heights. The ground floor activities, we talked about changing some permit processes to support businesses. From talking to our economic development staff, they basically said, is there any way that there's more types of uses that could be more principally allowed without having to get a use permit or go through a hearing? Like, there's probably some uses, in our lists that might qualify. So we did a deep dive and reviewed a lot of them and identified, I think, there's 5 that we're proposing to add that would basically be principally permitted, allowed to open without a public hearing. And then also we added thrift stores as well due to some changes in state law. So that's detailed in the staff report. Getting more down to the details here, our current requirements say that you can't have, your trash room, your electrical room, your mechanical room on a public frontage, and they should be from access from a parking lot or from an alley. But as you may be aware, state laws have changed where we're having building proposals come in that don't include any parking. And so we had to create some options to define where you could put those in that case. And then lastly, in terms of the ground floor, in certain zones where we have mixed-use buildings, we require a certain percentage of your ground floor to be an active frontage, those are the kinds of uses that really activate the public realm. And there was some questions from developers about how to calculate, we might require 50 or 100% to a certain depth of the building. And so we worked with current planning to come up with a better calculation to clarify that. And lastly, there's lots of little details and fixes that we did. I'll just highlight a couple. There's a diagram here about redefining when new pathways are required. You can see here there's this sort of new public connection. This is in our walkability section, and it talks about when you need to build a new public connection through your project. We added this requirement that in certain cases, you just have to ensure that there's not already one within 300 feet so that, for example, a development right here or right here wouldn't also be required to build a new public connection between there. We also made a little adjustment on our landscaping requirements. They were kind of scaling in the same 30-foot increments, and now we just added a different figure so that for every linear foot, you have to have so much landscaping. And then we defined some new terms throughout that helped us clarify about just about public, which sides of the building are public street frontages versus other types of alleys, paths, and that kind of thing. And there's some other details in everything is detailed in the staff report if you want to dig into that. So that's the details. We held our community meeting on March 13th. It was a more informational session. We had just a range of comments about some people asking for examples of good design on the east side where this would apply. These rules apply outside of the downtown. People asking about should we reduce the requirements. So we took that in. Took their comments in and noted it in the staff report. We're here tonight at the Planning Commission meeting. Assuming this goes forward, it's on the schedule for a May 27th City Council meeting. And also after that to be submitted to the Coastal Commission. I do also want to note for the City Council meeting, there's a couple changes that Public Works is putting forward that's related to this. They're updating their objective standards on bicycle facilities along some of the main corridors, and also potentially updating requirements around trash rooms and the details around the design of trash rooms. So they're running that through their Transportation and Public Works Commission, but when we go to City Council meeting, that'll be captured in with this. So with that, this is the recommendation that we have. It's the same one as in the staff report. That's the presentation on objective design standards. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. And thank you so much. First one. That was really great. So just to clarify our process, we're going to ask a round of questions with commissioners if you have any, and then we will move on to the next presentation, but both of these presentations are part of the same item, so it's going to get a little funky in terms of how that motion works, maybe. We'll see how it works out. But, okay, questions from commissioners for staff?
I have a quick question.
Commissioner Kelly?
So this was in part of the reasonable accommodations process. I wanted to check like what supports will be available to help people with disabilities navigate the reasonable accommodation process, especially for those without legal or technical assistance.
We're gonna, yeah, go ahead. Clara's gonna present on that item in
Okay.
the next presentation. So I think we're asking for questions on objective design standards for multifamily housing.
Commissioner McKelvey?
Thank you very much. I know how difficult it is to make rules like this. I understand the reasoning behind making the rules. I'll save the overall comments for later, but I do have some questions. How many units trigger objective standards, or is it simply a number of stories, floor area ratio? Is there a threshold? Do these rules apply to a one-story duplex if it's considered multifamily?
I think it's 2 units or more triggers these standards. So yeah, a 1-story duplex you have to apply the standards.
Okay. In the first page or the first section of your of the standards, there's a statement that a step back on the top floor can fulfill one of the roof form requirements. Is that in terms of the number that are required, or does only one of them allowed to satisfy it?
The first one.
You understand?
It can be one of the ways that you satisfy the roof form requirements. I'm pretty sure we proposed that a roof form or a step back of a certain distance and a certain length fulfills one roof form, and then the number of roof forms that you're required to include
Based on the size.
based on
I
the
get
length
that.
of your building.
But
Yes.
can it always be a step back
Yes.
in that upper floor? Okay. Do these standards apply to all sides of the buildings?
It depends on which ones.
I'm just looking at roof forms, building modulation, buildings 3 stories or less, 1 change in plane of roof form for every 30 feet of building face, and then buildings more than 3 stories, 1 change, et cetera, et cetera. But does that apply to all sides of the building, or even if it's a 0 setback next to another building, if you understand what I'm getting at?
That's a good question. I'll try to answer the first part of your question first. You can see in these diagrams, it's illustrated in here a little bit, but not called out exactly. But buildings 3 stories or fewer, these changes in plane are only required on that public frontage. So you can see it's the colored side here. You can see how it's white over here. So the changes in plane aren't required. Once you get up to more than 3 stories, the changes in plane are required on any side that is 50 feet or more, right? So that meets that first increment where it would require a change in plane.
So if that's an interior lot line in a block, it's still applicable, even if it's not visible?
Yeah. Anyone want to clarify?
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Sarah Noisy, Senior Planner with Planning Commission. I've been working with Bennett on this. So I was taking notes. Your question was, so for buildings that are greater than 3 stories in height.
I'm actually referring to any building
Okay.
where you have an interior lot line like on Pacific Avenue, and there's no public view of that facade.
Yes. So 2 things. Number 1, these standards apply outside of the downtown. The downtown is covered by the design standards in the downtown plan. So for those listening to the recording, that's a detail I'll just mention. But we could have that same condition out on Soquel, on Water Street, on Mission. They can all have a 0 side lot line. Each of the standards typically for buildings that are 3 stories or less in height, these modulation standards apply only to the front facade. When they are greater than 3 stories in height, they are 360-degree requirements for those modulations. There's the piece about the roof form is different. So the roof forms only apply from the public primary like public frontage.
And that's in all cases.
I believe so. The roof form, they only apply within 15 feet of a public right of way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's, oh, that's all right. I'll just wait. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Kennedy.
Great work. I love seeing like everything evolving and what's being fixed and, you know, problems being solved. And it's so complicated, but just running through it was impressive, the work you've done. So I have just a few kind of like thoughts and questions. This is the perfect slide. So I love the notch in the more than 3 stories over 100-foot frontage. This reminds me of like the downtown plan buildings that have big notches and small notches. What's the thinking about it not going down to the ground floor? Is that to just preserve retail square footage? I almost feel like a notch might be nice down there. In other areas, we're allowing for wood frame to kind of get rid of the big, tall podium steel part. So what do you think about that? Maybe extending that all the way down?
That was something that we talked back and forth about. I will say, I recall looking at the example of the Mission Street one, where we were saying, for example, like this was one where if we had, this is 150 feet long, so they would require, you know, one change in plane for each 50 feet. And the notch, right, because it goes in and then comes back out, that fulfills 2-year changes in plane. So it would need one change in plane plus a notch in it. And from the current planners talking about going back and forth with the architect, they were feeling like, plus the standards that we have about the percentage of your active frontage and how far that has to go into how far back that has to go into the ground floor.
Yeah, you're already cramming a lot of things.
Yeah, they were like, if you,
Driveways and
yes.
trash things and stuff.
So the thought was, the intent of the notch, we really feel like is from a distance, it's really effectively like breaking up that building massing. And so it was kind of a compromise of like, it would help preserve some flexibility for the design of the ground floor and the active ground floors. But if you step back a little bit, like, hey, that building looks so nice and cut out. So that was, I think, that's what I recall. If anyone you want to add some more?
Yeah, that was great. And I'll just add, the big challenge with these is that the ground floors of these buildings just have to do so much.
Yeah.
We're asking them to do so much. If they're providing any parking, like the dimensions of that are just really rigid. And so once you start putting this big notch into that floor in particular, it just is more impactful than making that change as part of like a stack of units, where it can be kind of between 2 units or like where the bedrooms are and they like notch in, you know?
Yeah, that's reasonable. So it was kind of small and picky, but I have a lot of, I work in apartment buildings all throughout the Bay Area, and the living wall is referred to in one spot. And I just wonder if we should revisit living walls. Like, there aren't many successful ones, especially in our climate. This is like a tiny detail, but it's in one of the drawings, and we might just want to nuke that. I don't know how others feel about it, but at least everyone's like, we're never doing that green building point again. We hate it. We planted it once, it died. We had to like pay to get the vine off the 4th floor. So I just thought I would throw that out as an added suggestion. And more of a comment, but I love the like addressing the flat roof thing with the series of downtown buildings. As the standards change, you can really see the difference with that flat, parapet. And I get it, it saves money, but I really like seeing the notch in that respect. I like seeing that setback. I wonder if there's any way we can even more encourage sloped roofs, or if that's impossible, I don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah, sorry to ramble on. Is there a way to enhance, encouraging sloped roofs at that top level?
I mean, I think that's probably a question for a developer. I mean, we have ways that we have things that we can require. And, we are constantly in this battle with what's going to be kind of economically feasible and therefore highly incentivized, just sort of inherently in development. And flat roofs are really easy to build, and then they're easy to build your mechanical systems on and fit your solar and have your projecting elevator shaft that's screened by your parapet. And they're kind of a lot of reasons that on this type of building with modern like mechanical needs, they end up being with flat roofs. Mm-hmm. So I would be cautious about creating like requirements for slope because I think that could start to impact the upper story of a building and just, kind of add complication.
I totally hear you. Like solar panels, yes, of course, but just like, it seems like flat and notching back is good. But like, anyway, it might be something to think about a little bit more. I've heard this very consistently through 14 years of service from every neighbor is like, we want tile roofs, we want metal roofs, we want more roof lines. So I get that it costs money, but particularly for those big buildings, it seems like a little bit more maybe could be done or added. And I get it, this is fully baked and it's a new idea, but just wanted to put it out there. All right, those are my questions for now.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
Just to briefly, the 12-foot, the lower 12-foot height, is that measured to the ceiling of the first floor or to the second floor line? That 12-foot dimension?
Oh, that's a great question. I know we specify it in the in the code, but I don't have it in front of me. I think it's to the, I don't want to get, yeah?
Yeah, if it's to the ceiling, I'm a happy camper and we
Okay.
move on.
Yeah, we can double check, but I believe so. We used the existing 15-foot standard we didn't, which I think was already to the ceiling, and then just essentially, added a new section. And so I think so, but yeah, we'll double check on that.
Okay, great. Any other questions from commissioners?
It's a small one, and it'll come up, I think, later as well. But I just want to make sure that the dimension for doors that is sometimes listed as 2 feet, as long as the door is 3 feet from the property line. And again, I'm a happy camper, but the doors shouldn't be allowed to cross property lines.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Looks like there are no further questions. I had just a quick clarification on the drip line situation. I'm just curious about the reasoning for needing to define that a little bit more closely, just for my own curiosity.
So we have a standard, I'm remembering right now. This is my remembering phase. We have a standard about counting the area that's under an existing tree towards the required open space on a property. And that standard was written to sort of incentivize keeping existing trees. So we allow that space that's underneath the tree canopy to be counted twice. And as part of like discussing that at the beginning of this process, it seemed like defining drip line for the tree would be helpful to interpreting that standard. That's an existing standard. So we're adding a definition to the word drip line to just make sure that we all are consistently applying that.
And so that area under the drip line counts towards the private open space or the public open space?
To the public, to the common open space.
Common open space, got it. Okay,
yeah.
Great. All right, wonderful. If there's no further questions, I think we'll move on to presentation 2.0.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Clara Stanger, senior planner. I will be presenting this second, somewhat shorter, simpler presentation. So, overview of the other updates associated with this amendment package. We're looking at some changes to our density bonus ordinance. reasonable accommodations, licensed community care facilities, low barrier navigation centers, and supporting historical preservation on Mission Street. So starting with density bonus, the state law has been updated several times in the last few years, and we anticipate it will continue to evolve in the future. So for this update, we're proposing a minor change to our density bonus ordinance that simply says that if the state law is inconsistent with our ordinance, then state law will prevail. So this action also implements Housing Element Objective 2.3A, which calls for the city to update the density bonus ordinance to reflect state law allowances. In the future, we're also going to look at doing a deeper dive into the density bonus ordinance to do a couple things, looking at updated guidance on base density calculations, as well as calculating density bonuses based on floor area ratio, in where the general plan land use designation doesn't have a specified residential density range. Okay, so for reasonable accommodations, the Fair Housing Act requires jurisdictions to provide reasonable accommodations with regard to rules, policies, practices, and procedures where such accommodations may be necessary to make housing accessible for persons with disabilities. Housing Element Objective 3.1C calls for us to implement these accommodations that are required by law. So reasonable accommodations provide a basis for residents with disabilities to request flexibility in the application of land use and zoning regulations, or sometimes a waiver of certain regulations or requirements in order to ensure equal access to housing opportunities. So requests can come from individuals or from developers who are seeking to serve a specific population with disabilities. The different types of accommodations could include allowances for wheelchair ramps in required setbacks, additional time to comply with application procedures, and other types of things too. So this proposal would include a new section 24.04.260 that would establish a process to request relief from zoning standards or procedures that would limit access to housing for these households. We would also be posting the policy to the city website, as well as on paper handouts in our public lobby. Okay, licensed community care residential facilities. Housing Element Objective 3.1D calls for the city to update our zoning ordinance requirements related to licensed community care residential facilities of 7 or more people in order to allow these uses in all residential zones, and to modify the permitting process to permit the uses with objectivity to facilitate approval certainty similar to other uses of the same type in the same zone. So a community care residential facility is defined in the State Health and Safety Code as any family home, group care facility, or similar facility determined by the department for 24-hour non-medical care of persons in need of personal services, supervision, or assistance essential for sustaining the activities of daily living or for the protection of the individual. These are homes for children or adults with physical or developmental disabilities or mental disorders who need help in carrying out their day-to-day lives. The term also covers a home that includes mental health treatment and rehabilitation, and it also includes foster family homes. So the municipal code currently allows this type of use in the various residential zone districts, but generally it requires a special use permit for facilities with 7 or more people. We also looked at guidance from the State Housing and Community Development Department that indicates that these types of uses should be treated like other residential uses, and our regulations should be mindful of fair housing and also steer clear of potential discrimination issues. So the proposed amendments would allow community care residential facilities as a by right use in every residential zone district, regardless of the size of the facility, and they would be allowed in residential structures that are otherwise allowed in the zone district. So the structure is regulated as a structure, a single family home or multifamily home, and then the use can come in as a by right use. Here is a map of the residential zone districts in the city. As you can see, it covers most of the city except for some areas near the beach and the downtown and our industrial areas, and then our major corridors. Okay, moving on to low barrier navigation centers. State law requires us to implement code changes related to low barrier navigation centers. A low barrier navigation center is defined as a facility that provides temporary living facilities while case managers connect clients to income, public benefits, health services, and housing. And I'll also mention that our housing element, objective 3.3L, also calls for us to be consistent with this state law. So in these navigation centers, clients are allowed to keep their partners, pets, possessions, and privacy. So I guess that's the 4 Ps. The city must allow this use by right in all mixed use or commercial zone districts that allow housing. Note that the ordinance in the packet includes this in the mixed use zones, the community commercial, the neighborhood commercial, commercial thoroughfare, and the PA zone, what is P? Anyways, professional and administrative, thank you. Okay, so we are also gonna add this use into the RTC and the CB zones. And those are, I believe, in the, like the lower beach, flats, beach, boardwalk sort of area of town. So that's gonna be added into the ordinance that goes to city council. And the state law also determines the operational standards that these uses must abide by. And that is also part of our proposed ordinance. Okay, so the last minor update on this list tonight is about historic preservation on Mission Street, and specifically along the professional and administrative PA zone district, which is the northeastern segment of Mission Street that runs from the Chestnut Street extension and Highway 1 intersection southeast almost to Laurel Street. So this proposed amendment affects historically designated buildings within this stretch of Mission Street. There are 13 buildings along this stretch that are on the city's historic building survey, and most, if not all of these, were originally constructed as residential uses. The PA zone of Mission Street allows residential uses only as part of a mixed-use development, and the development must have an active commercial frontage that takes up at least 50% of the frontage. But these requirements don't work very well for these historic buildings for a variety of reasons. The big ones being the cost of making changes to meet commercial building codes, and also the fact that market conditions strongly favor residential uses right now. The Mission Street Urban Design Plan and the implementing Mission Street Overlay Zone District promote commercial uses along Mission Street, but they promote them more strongly in the commercial and mixed use zone areas that are south of Laurel Street. For example, in this area in question, north of Laurel, which the Mission Street Urban Design Plan refers to as the Mission Hill Zone, the plan prohibits new single-family homes in this area. But whereas in the south of Laurel area, which the plan calls the West Side area, it prohibits ground use residential altogether. So there's a much stronger emphasis on that ground use commercial south of Laurel Street. So what this proposal does is it includes an amendment to the historic preservation regulations under Chapter 2412 of the zoning ordinance. The amendment would allow residential uses on the ground floor as part of a mixed use or multifamily use with approval of a historic variation permit on this stretch of Mission Street in the PA zone district. A historic variation permit is a discretionary permit that allows variations to uses or development standards when the owner in exchange does specific things to rehabilitate and preserve the historic nature of their building. So what these amendments would do is retain the economic functionality of these historic buildings while ensuring the continued rehabilitation and preservation of the building's historic qualities. I would like to note that this variation is already allowed like in all commercial areas of the city, except along Mission Street and in the downtown plan area. So what this would do would make a small change in the buildings eligible for this variation. And that concludes my presentation. I am available for any questions.
All right, wonderful, thank you. At this time, we'll take questions from commissioners, and then I think as a matter of process, we do have to open this item up to the public too and receive public comments. So we'll do that after questions for this particular segment of the item. So any questions from commissioners? Commissioner McKelvey.
Thank you again. These are all very complicated and somewhat vexing topics. Similar question to the ones that I had in the previous section. For example, the reasonable accommodations section, are there applicability thresholds again based on number of units or size of building or anything like that? If we're are we talking about a duplex again or where do these apply?
So reasonable accommodations come out of federal fair housing law, yep. And they apply to any site or any unit where someone with a disability or a household with someone with a disability is trying to access housing. Mm-hmm. So they could be applied to a single family home, they could be applied to a whole site of a multifamily development if it's being developed by a developer who has an intended population that has a higher likelihood of having those disabilities. They can be applied for with existing buildings, so they can apply to we've had them come in for fences. People want to do an overheight fence because they have a family member that's needs more privacy in their yes. yard. So it could really be any kind of residential property.
Great. And then for the low barrier navigation centers, are we as a community trying to target a certain number of facilities? Is there something that, is there a policy that we're responding to now in terms of wanting to place a certain number of facilities in the community?
Not that I'm aware of. So again, this is state law that just says we have to make it a permitted and allowable use. So that's really what's driving our response. I'm only aware of, one intended navigation center. I don't know if it would strictly meet this definition of a low barrier navigation center as defined by this section of state law. But, again, that's planning that's done through a different team in our homelessness response.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Kelly.
I'm going to re-ask my question. So I'm curious at what supports will be available to help people with disabilities navigate the reasonable accommodation process, especially for those without the legal or technical assistance.
So the department's required, the city is required to provide any assistance that people may need in order to make their application. So that could be as simple as supporting them in reading the form if they have trouble with vision. It could be as extensive as supporting them in filling out the form if they have some sort of cognitive disabilities that prevent them from being able to express themselves well in writing. So because the range of disabilities is so wide, I don't have just one answer for you, but the city is required to provide that support to request a reasonable accommodation.
Okay, thank you. And then I had another question with the low barrier facilities as well. Normally, I feel like this has a lot of historical resistance and pushback. Is there going to be any community education programs to kind of help the community be more accepting of these facilities?
I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question. So we've done our community outreach, which is essentially informational in nature, right? This is not an item that we are soliciting feedback about. It's a state law. We have to implement it. We're doing so. This is what it means. So that's been kind of the tenor and extent of our outreach. I think as facilities like this go to open, there can be a wide range in terms of how large these facilities are, right? Like, you could have a facility that's run by like a church that really only can accommodate 10 people. And so that's gonna have a really kind of different public conversation and neighborhood reaction and conversation than, say, a newly constructed, publicly built project that's meant to serve 150 to 250 people every day. So I think that's really just gonna have to be taken on one at a time by those projects as they are seeking approvals.
And thank you for the question. I would also just add, reaching out to our homelessness response team. They might have a more specific answer to your question in terms of the outreach done for those. We're mostly just laying out the zoning, and they're the ones actually on the ground building this stuff and planning for it. So,
Okay, awesome.
yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we will open this up to the public. If there are members of the public that want to speak on this item, you can line up over here to my left and sign in should you want to. Is there any members of the public here tonight that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will close the public comment period and return to the commission for comments or further questions from staff.
Can we make a quick clarification here? We checked on the ceiling heights in the code, and currently it is measured from top of floor to top of floor. And that's in all cases, both in the standard 15-foot ceiling height and in the 12-foot height.
Okay, and that's from grade, on the first floor, from grade to the second floor line?
From the top of floor on the first floor to the top of floor on the second floor.
Okay, thank you.
Comments, questions? Or we can entertain a motion. Commissioner McKelvey.
Thank you again, because I do believe these are very difficult rules to write. People have different interpretations and views of these things, but it's just always difficult to come up with really good rules that take into account the outlier examples. And I really appreciate that this process has been to kind of review the previous guidelines and kind of update them based on feedback that's been gotten. I hope that there's an ongoing cyclical arrangement where that will continue to happen. I was a little bit bothered when I read sort of some of the formal, the step backs and the notches and things, when I thought that, buildings like the St. George or the Palomar or some of the more, I think, valued buildings downtown, they wouldn't meet any of these rules, except perhaps the one that says if it's a 6-inch deep windowsill or something like that, then is it none of these apply in that case?
To that question, so we did add in that option to have those deeper inset windows, and that would waive a lot of those requirements.
Okay.
So that was done with the intention to promote those more traditional building styles.
I think that's really good judgment. I'd just like to say that a very esteemed former member of this body and the city council that I actually worked for once said to me, give me a set of rules and I can design a hideous building, or I can completely ignore them and design a beautiful building. And so I would just like to advocate for, when there's a choice of doing, when you're formulating a policy going forward with this, I'd like to advocate for a lighter touch being preferable to a heavy hand. I think overall that's my sense of what's coming out here. But I really appreciate the obviously huge amount of thought that's gone into this, and thank you very much.
Okay, any other comments? Commissioner Kennedy.
I also appreciate just the complexity and like referring to the other plans, and just always appreciate any efforts to like iron those things out, because they're so vexing when you read this plan and that plan and they don't agree. And then I did feel like, I agree this system's hard and it doesn't necessarily encourage beauty. Maybe the reverse, I don't know. But I did feel a bit more of our kind of local control coming back. So I just wanted to salute that we can say, we are not going to approve big ugly boxes that are just flat in all areas. So I really appreciate that, kind of as that pendulum comes a little bit back into our ballpark.
Yeah, I would just quickly say the same. Thank you for all your work on this and for cleaning some of this stuff up and trying to make some of this a little prettier as much as we can, right? Okay, I think we are ready possibly for a motion. Can we get the recommendations back up so we can get clear on what it is we're doing here again? There we go. Okay, so we have a recommendation from staff to approve the proposed amendments to the City of Santa Cruz General Plan, Municipal Code, and LCP, Local Coastal Program, as shown in the attachments and noted in this report, and acknowledge the determination that the proposed amendments are covered by the EIR prepared for the city's general plan and approved in June 2012, and find that the changes are also exempt under CEQA, section 15061B3. So we'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to move approval as written.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Kennedy, seconded by Commissioner Thompson. Any further discussion? Okay, can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
McKelvey,
Aye.
Chair Paul Hamas.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Okay, just so the public knows, I know that item number 3 on our agenda is an informational item, and that kind of got plopped right in the middle of our public hearing. So we're going to move that to item number 4 and move forward item number 4 to item number 3. So item number 3, consideration of bylaw changes related to the start of meeting time for the current planning commission. And let's see, I don't think we have a, oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. There was some confusion. We had talked to Commissioner Thompson prior to the meeting. He was interested in introducing another part of the motion. And
I thought this was coming up as a second item.
He thought it was coming at a different time. Is it
Okay,
possible to go back? I think there was a friendly amendment or something you wanted to make.
Yeah, sure, that's totally fine. Just as a matter of process,
I'll double check, but I believe we can open it back up to vote in the same meeting if it's your call.
if you're okay with ping ponging that a little bit,
Yes.
that's okay by me. So yeah, let's hear it.
Thank you. I appreciate the account. This is actually a relatively small issue, but I think of importance to, as stated clearly in our rules, so that it can be considered uniformly. And this has to do with public sidewalks, basically. And I'm bringing this to this strong feelings about the subject. And in the staff's illustrations, They describe the sidewalk as being from the curb to the property line. And I have strong feelings that that doesn't really describe how sidewalks work, because there's an area between the curb and where people walk that I call the curb zone, because it's this zone that where you put all the stuff that would get in the way of a pedestrian, street lights, signs, fire hydrants, message boards, kind of all manner of things. And it's parking meters high on that list. And I think it's very useful when we're designing our streets, and we are talking about the area between the curb and the building, to be mindful of what we expect out of this very public space. So I routinely call the area between the face of the curb and where people walk as the curb zone, because it is where all of that stuff ends up. And if you walk down Pacific Avenue and start listing all the things that we put in the curb zone, it's remarkable, from fire hydrants and signboards and street lights and trees and all of the rest. And so what I am suggesting, oh, look, it's on the, I had submitted this sketch to, that was really kind of relevant to Pacific Avenue or downtown. But it indicates that the curb zone is just 2.5 feet wide. And then the sidewalk I've described here is 8 feet, but that's really unique to the location. There would be some places where a 12-foot sidewalk or even a 16-foot sidewalk would be appropriate. But in a typical downtown area, 8 feet is about right, because that allows people to pass each other, as two couples passing each other without having to step aside. It allows a free flow of pedestrian traffic. And so that's kind of a starting point. But I think that sidewalk width is something that is variable depending on the location and the pedestrian density for that location. The other part of it, though, is this thing called the dooryard. And I got kind of caught up in the subject of dooryards a while ago. And it's actually, it was having dinner with a remarkable Egyptian urbanist who explained the history back to ancient times of the dooryard, because merchants wanted to sell their stuff to people walking by, but the road was owned by the emperor. So the merchant had to get the permission from the emperor to have his stuff out on the road. And we're really talking about the same thing even now. That is to say, people want to have something that allows them to reach out to the public that's walking by. So we already have a lot of stuff in the dooryard, usually just plants. But it also can be deliberately increased, because there's really good data going back to the beginning of the 20th century that that place, that dooryard, is a really hot spot to merchandise. And if you don't actually have merchandise out there, it's a way to suck them in the door. And literally at the beginning of the 20th century, there was research done to show that if you set your door back, it sucked customers in. Shopping department stores in New York City started recessing their doors at the beginning of the 20th century because it was shown that it worked. We did it at Bookshop Santa Cruz on both frontages, and all of our earthquake replacement buildings downtown had dooryards of one dimension or another. So my suggestion here is that, first of all, we recognize that the dooryard typically would have to be 3 feet because the door has to swing into something that's not a sidewalk. That would get in the way of people walking by. And what I'm suggesting is that, in fact, we consider the sidewalk to include the dooryard, and that the dooryard in a place like on a major street would essentially mean that a portion of the ground floor has to be set back 3 feet to create this dooryard. Now, I'm totally open to the notion that it doesn't have to be 3 feet for the entire frontage of a building. But I think that there's a pretty good argument that there should be a dooryard of something like 2 feet so that there's room for plants, A-frame signs or something like that that is not in the street, because it's not impinging on the public being able to enjoy a sidewalk. But I think that we should include in our standards some acknowledgement of the dooryard, that it's that you have to have a dooryard that accommodates doors swinging open that don't cross the property line, so that the door swing is entirely on the private property, and that I would encourage that we require something like a 2-foot dooryard on any of our commercial streets where we expect pedestrian traffic. And it doesn't need to be the entire frontage. I mean, we can have the columns supporting the upper floors don't need to be set back. It's really just acknowledging that we want to have an enlivened pedestrian sense on the street. And quite frankly, the dooryards are where the merchants have an opportunity to show their stuff and be a good neighbor and welcome people to the sidewalk. It's this non-functional portion of the sidewalk. And it gets us thinking about the fact that the sidewalk is like a street. It's a pedestrian street. And so we wouldn't allow somebody to put a fire hydrant in the middle of the street. We'd insist that it be off to the side in the curb zone. So it's just acknowledging that sidewalks are serious ways for people to get around in our towns, and that we can set aside a sidewalk and then acknowledge that there's other stuff that doesn't belong in the way of the sidewalk. So, I don't know, I'm not clever enough to put it into code language.
So I accept the friendly amendment, that's great.
I just really quickly, just to be clear to the public, that we're adding a friendly amendment to the motion that was just passed. And if everybody's good with that, I'm good with that.
Or should we start?
Yeah.
We might want to, I mean, I don't necessarily think we need to start clean unless staff thinks it's.
Just
What
to,
do you
yeah, we can do just a revote again.
Yeah.
With that amendment in there. And just to clarify, what this is intended to do is bring whatever details from Commissioner Thompson's diagram into this figure 15 and edit that as possible. Staff has been, and thank you again so much, Commissioner, for reaching out to us ahead of time. It was really appreciated and gave us some time to coordinate with Public Works on this, because they do also have some jurisdiction over the sidewalk. And so there is some analysis we still need to do on ensuring there's consistency across their standards and our standards and what Commissioner Thompson drew. But initially, in talking with Public Works as well, there's definitely changes and improvements we can make on that figure 15 based on your work. So thank you for that.
Okay, great. And I want to get Commissioner McKelvey's comment in here too, especially if we're going to be adding a friendly amendment. Can we
I also
bring
have a comment.
Okay, and Commissioner Kelly, can we bring the recommendation back up? And I know, Commissioner Thompson, that you probably don't have any firm language yet, or as I understood it. Could we So I think that friendly amendment could go down at the bottom where we could you wordsmith something really quickly and just say that we want to have a recessed, I'm sorry, what was the word you used again?
A dooryard?
Dooryard. So a dooryard.
Proposal is just to modify that one diagram. Because, I mean, I'd be open as the maker of the motion to like explore putting it into the code, realizing it's kind of late here.
Correct, yeah, there could be some text as well that could, expound upon that diagram further as, as Commissioner Thompson mentioned. But the motion would really just be to, support staff making changes as possible to then be presented to city council and just, acknowledging that we'll make changes after this meeting that will go to council and not back to planning commission.
That was going to be my question, is how are we going to move this on with a direction, but yet allow the latitude for staff to kind of figure out and work with Public Works on how this is actually going to play out. So
Unless Public Works says like, no, then bring it right back to us, please.
Tess, would you mind changing it over while I try to type this up so the wordsmithing can happen off screen briefly?
Okay, did we still have comments from commissioners?
Just one thing.
Commissioner McKelvey, while this is,
I'm completely supportive of this idea. It's something I'm very familiar with from other cities. The way that the diagram reads, it feels like kind of an extrusion, and I don't think that's what you have in mind. So at some point, I think it would be good to kind of add a per linear, per width of building, or some kind of standard about how much it would be and where. A lot of these buildings, they would have a clear story at the front of the store, might have the roll down shade in it, and then each vendor, each shopkeeper would pull back their facade in different places and make little pockets. And I think that's something that adds a lot of dynamics and activity to a street front. But it probably needs to be defined in some way. And I'll leave that to your capable hands.
Can you speak a little more to that?
Sure.
Just for some further clarification.
The way the diagram reads, there's the front of there's the main facade that's above the ground floor, and then there's a part that's pulled back, and that could be read as if you were just kind of taking a router in there and taking that whole floor, the whole ground floor facade back. Mm-hmm. And I think that would kind of weaken the street front, but I absolutely agree that there are places where it would really enrich, being able to have someone outside or one of their employees outside with some of their wares saying, look at this, it's, please come in. And it's a little anchor and something that draws people in.
There's one of my favorite historic examples on Pacific Avenue is, I still call it the ID building, but it's where the shoe company is. And the wonderful columns on the front facade are right up to the property line. But between the columns, the facade steps back about 2 feet. And it allows planting and the like.
And I don't know if I'm sure you remember the United Cigar Company. And they always had scads of things out on the walk in front of the building. Yeah. So I think can add a lot of richness. I just would like it to be a little more defined in the language, or maybe just specifically left as something that's to be examined and proposed or refined.
And we're certainly happy to work with you both, Commissioner Thompson and McKelvey, as we work on those standards and just make sure we're hitting the marks. So we'll reach back out to you as well to confirm our work.
Thank you.
Matt, we've got some proposed language. If you want to.
really quickly, comment from Commissioner Kelly as well.
So I know Pacific Avenue is your inspiration for this, but I believe downtown has its own objective standards. So I don't believe this would apply to downtown. Is that correct?
Correct.
Fine.
So I was like counting.
Ready?
I was counting former architects I've served with, not including you two, and 5 of them, I think, would like this idea, because it's a really good idea. And we did it downtown and it worked, so That's what everyone wants in their neighborhood, like Seabright and out where I live, is that walkability. And we just struggle with it. We have these weird storefront windows, like by Safeway, where it's this deep and it gets painted over. So just re-emphasizing this is a good one. I really trust staff to fine tune it moving forward.
Okay, it looks like we have some language up there, and give you a second to read it, and I think Commissioner Kennedy has to accept, and then we can do a revote.
Looks good to me.
Works for me.
Okay, any further comments?
So would this friendly amendment make it so that it would have to adhere to this? Would the friendly amendment make it so that you would have to adhere to this curb?
Yeah, I don't think it's, I think the dimensions aren't laid out here. So that's kind of the key part, is that there will be some streets where the curb zone doesn't need to be 30 inches, as there might be times when it wants to be wider. When I first started talking to other planners about this, it was the south of Laurel stuff that was on my mind, where there were going to be wider streets and wider sidewalks. And I wanted to make sure that the wider sidewalks accommodated these things specifically. But I think certainly it's our commercial streets that we're most concerned about.
Sure.
Sorry to jump in here. So I just want to be like crystal clear. So we're referencing proposed figure 15, which in our draft of the ordinance is in the section of the code that applies to corridor frontage. So this is talking about specifically frontages on SoCal, Water, Ocean Street, Mission, okay? So this is not Branson 40, this is not Westcliff, this is, these are our major transportation, commercial mixed-use corridors where we have this standard that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we have a motion that has been seconded, and as amended, let's take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
McKelvey,
Aye.
Chair Paul Hamus.
Aye. That passes unanimously. And now we will do our flippy flop and move to the consideration of bylaw changes related to the start of the Planning Commission meeting. This was technically item number 4, but given the way the agenda got structured, we're just going to flip that around to number 3, and we will look at our housing element update for 2024 as item number 4 after the public hearing. I'm not sure. I don't think there's is there a staff report on this? Or?
There's only, thank you, sorry, Chair, there's only a very brief staff report on this that commissioners can discuss as you like, changes to the, supporting changes to the bylaws. This would then have to go to council for adoption. So there's a number of ways you can go about that in discussing whether there's a certain start time that you would prefer. If you're open to, having an open start time that could change based on a variety of factors. Sometimes there's other meetings like in May, for instance, we have Affordable Housing Month events throughout the month, and one might fall on a Thursday Planning Commission meeting. You might want flexibility to have a meeting earlier or later based on that. But maybe you want a preferred meeting time that generally would start earlier than 7 p.m., for instance, is what we've heard from some folks. So it's completely up to your discretion and discussion on what moves forward to council. If you would like any changes to those to that starting time, we specifically noticed this just to open up this bylaw discussion for the meeting time. So no other changes to bylaws would be on the table at the moment. And if you would like to have more changes to the bylaws, that would have to go be noticed again for a separate meeting. But, so right now on the table is just that meeting time question. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Are there questions for staff on this? Okay, we'll save,
What are are there other commissions doing this? Is everybody doing it? Is it just us? Okay.
Really quickly, we will open this to comment from the public. And if there's anybody here that wishes to speak on the meeting start time for the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Cruz, please come forward. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period and return to the commission. Commissioner McKelvey, you had a comment.
I'll just reiterate what I said at the previous meeting. I'm absolutely fine with changing the time if that's the commission's will, but I want to make sure that we're not limiting the access of the public based on time of day, kids getting dinner, things like that. So that's my only concern.
Yeah, I would just quickly say that I'm fairly indifferent myself to the start time. 6 or 7 is good for me. And I think that 6 offers enough of an opportunity for people to get here for items. And that's just my position on it. Any other comments, discussion? Commissioner Kennedy?
I'm fine with changing it. Based on years of service, like, people expect it to be a certain time, so I don't think it should change willy-nilly. And I actually wonder if having different times might actually help people. I don't know if it would help or hurt, but I'm totally open to it. Are you looking to us to provide like what we want in terms of a time, or?
Yeah, it's completely open to the Planning Commission. I think we'd maybe heard a comment at one point from one commissioner of interest in changing it. So this was just to open it to you all.
I hope it wasn't me.
No, I believe that Commissioner Dan raised it.
Okay.
And another option that you have is to continue it to a meeting that she'll be at.
Yeah, I moved to, I mean, if you all are into it, I moved to.
I was going to suggest that I think it might be good to get input from the entire commission, or at least more than 5 of us, especially if the person who raised the particular issue isn't here tonight. So that's another way to go, is we could continue it, but I wouldn't continue it to the next meeting.
No.
Might push it out a little bit further. So, but that's, we do. That's
So
at the will of the
move
commission.
I'll move to continue to a future meeting with a light agenda.
How about May 15th? If we already have something for May 15th.
We'll potentially have the LCP update. Oh yeah, and the CIP general plan could, I think it'd be fine on that agenda.
Sounds fine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you noticed this or not, but if you did it to a specific date, it wouldn't need to be renoticed. That's the only reason why.
Okay.
All I see on May 1st, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there's an appeal of a potential project. Could that fit?
Yeah, on May 1st, we have the 530 Ocean Street appeal, which might be a larger item, but I mean, this isn't too big of an item, so it could go on that. There is also the other item on the 1st is there's a ride at the boardwalk that needs Planning Commission approval as well.
I love those ones.
So there's 2 items on 5-1 and
An appeal.
at least 1 item on 5-15, maybe 2.
All right, so let's
Probably go-
I'll
it'll
move
probably go
to,
on either.
Continue it to 5-1. No reason not to knock it out then.
Second?
We have a second?
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, I think on this one, we can just all say aye, or
Aye.
all who say
Aye.
aye. Okay, any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. We'll continue that to May 1st. Okay, up next, we have an informational item on the 2024 Annual Housing Element and General Plan Progress Report, and we will hear an update on that from staff.
And yeah, thanks again. We we don't have a presentation, but we did provide Planning Commission with our annual progress report and submittal. And we presented this to council last week prior to submitting it to the state. Clara's here, our senior planner, Clara Stenger. She's the one who really took on all of this annual progress report, and it's a pretty intensive report due to the state every year to track our housing progress. So Clara's here to answer any further questions.
Okay, any questions from commissioners?
I'd just like to say thank you. It was a mountain of work. It's a great effort. Thank you very much.
I just had a quick question, and thank you so much for doing this as well. This is like the hard work. This is the spreadsheet work that I just dread at my job. Yeah, this is tough stuff. I just had a quick question about ADUs and ADU production. Is that still really just like a big basis for a lot of our lower income, or some of our lower income units? Is the ADU machine still cranking? Is that?
It is definitely still cranking. We are still on an upward trend. As of last year, I think we had the largest number of ADU building permits issued in a year. Our affordability for ADUs is currently based on a survey that was done a couple of years ago. 50% of ADUs count as low income, 40% is moderate, and then 10% is above moderate. So those are contributing significantly in the low and the moderate categories.
That's
towards our
great.
RENA numbers.
That's great. And as I see it, what we're kind of, I mean, at this point, right here, according to the table, is we're kind of lagging on the moderate units at this point. We're killing it with the low and very low.
Yes, we are lagging on moderate and above moderate right now. And so ADUs have been perhaps the sole thing that has been filling those moderates in the last year. We are still at the beginning of our RENA cycle. We have some projects that might help fill in that number, like the workforce, the educated workforce housing might fall under that category. So that will help with that. And then we are going to have some larger projects come through in the next year or two that have been making their way through the entitlement process, and that will also help to boost our above moderate numbers.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Wonderful. Great. Commissioner Kennedy.
It's just like incredible. Like we're kind of like on target. It's all still rolling into this next RENA cycle. Like 15 years ago, I would not have believed this in any way. So I salute. Yeah, but all the work that's gone on up here, it's just really amazing. Well done. To see it happening.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. I think that is it. We have no subcommittee or advisory body oral reports. One item referred to a future agenda, which is our time change for the Planning Commission, and that will be heard on May 1st. And I believe that's it. So we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, man.
Sorry, still just had a few director updates quick. Is that okay?
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to highlight a couple things. I know we mentioned the agendas coming up a little bit already. One thing too, a couple months back, we did also provide City Council with a legislative update for the 2024 legislation. Our April's agendas have been packed and we haven't figured out where to put this. So I think what we're going to do is send you that report as well, just by email. And you're welcome to reach out if you have any questions about the legislation. I know it already comes at a time when we're already tracking all the 2025 legislation and gearing up for another big, a number of other changes that are coming through the legislature right now, but still might be of interest to Planning Commission to check out that report that we did. And then, 417 downtown. So that'll be the next Planning Commission big one. We'll be getting that info to you as soon as possible. We're going to be posting it early, likely early next week is our goal right now. Certainly at the latest, it would be the end of next week, but we're looking to get it out on probably by Tuesday. So be looking for that. Have a few extra days to check out the packet because it will be large. But I encourage you, the draft plan is up right now on the website. You can start looking at that now, as well as, the draft EIR and the local traffic analysis. So there are other pieces to check out right now on the website already to get ahead of that a little bit. But yeah, we are excited to get that to you earlier than usual, which will be nice. And then, yeah, the meeting on 5/1, the boardwalk ride and the 5:30 ocean appeal. And then 5:15 is the LCP, the local coastal program update. We're shooting for that date, but that is TBD. The other item on 5:15 will be the capital improvement project, general plan conformance analysis, which is something we bring every year as well. And that completes my report.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off that first time.
No problem.
Okay, now we will adjourn the meeting. Okay, wonderful.
Thanks all.
I thought there was some plot afoot with the time change.